There are screams no one should ever hear. The kind that rattle through the bone more than the ear. The kind that linger long after the mouth that made them has gone silent. On a winter night in 1912, in a cabin buried so deep in the Virginia mountains that no map dared mark it, neighbors claimed they heard such a sound. A scream that wasn't just pain, but a tearing, an unmaking. They said it rose from the Whitaker homestead and carried across the frozen hollers like a funeral bell. By the time anyone was brave or foolish enough to investigate, they found only silence. Smoke rose from the chimney, but no firelight glowed from within. The front door stood open, swaying gently against the wind, and just inside it lay a trail of blood darkening against the warped wooden floorboards. They followed it into the birthing room, where they found a girl no older than 16 collapsed on the bed, her body split open by the labor of something that should never have been born. Her eyes were wide but glassy, frozen in a stare that told more than words ever could. What they saw in the cradle beside her was spoken of only in whispers afterward. Some said it was a child. Others said it was a mistake of flesh, a collection of limbs and mouths that should never have drawn breath. One man swore he saw 3 small hands, each clenching and unclenching like spiders, while another claimed he saw a face that wasn't formed, but layered, as if 2 or 3 masks had been pressed together and left to melt in the fire. Whatever it was, it lived, if only briefly, long enough for its wails to crawl into the marrow of those who heard them. The family didn't bury it, that much is certain. They wrapped it in a quilt stitched from scraps of their ancestors' clothing and placed it deep in the earth, beneath the floorboards. A secret offering to the blood that had created it. They didn't call the preacher, didn't ring the church bell. No baptism, no headstone, just silence. And yet, generations later, records still speak of that night. Records no one was meant to find. Because the girl was pregnant, yes, but no one knew who the father was. No one outside the family, anyway. Inside, the answer was more grotesque than anyone dared imagine. Which city are you watching from? And what time is it right now? The mountains keep their secrets well. Fog drapes across the ridges like burial cloth, muting sound, erasing trails. Outsiders who dared to wander too far often spoke of a weight in the air, a heaviness that pressed on the lungs until they turned back. The Whitakers chose this place for a reason. Not for farming, not for trade, but for concealment. Old census ledgers from Roanoke County list their name first in 1847. Joshua Whitaker, patriarch, 32 years of age, his household unusually large, 2 wives, Martha and Rebecca, sisters by birth but bound to him both in marriage. The ink on the page looks hurried, as if the census taker was eager to leave the mountain as soon as the count was done. Even then, neighbors whispered that Joshua had come here not to build, but to vanish. The land he claimed was poor and unforgiving. Rocky slopes, thin soil, winters that cut through bone. Yet he thrived, not by bending the land to his will, but by withdrawing deeper into it. He raised 14 children in a cabin too small for half that number. And when those children came of age, something unspoken happened. They didn't leave. They didn't take husbands or wives from neighboring hollers. Instead, their bonds remained inside the walls of that cabin, twisting into something that blurred the lines between brother, sister, father, and spouse. Local church records speak in careful language, unions not sanctioned, marriages without license. The preacher eventually stopped visiting altogether. By 1860, the Whitakers were a people unto themselves, answering to no town, no church, no law but their own. The journals found a century later would reveal why. Joshua wrote of purity, of the divine blood placed in his line, and of the danger of allowing it to be diluted by outsiders. He told his children they were chosen, that God had placed a spark in them that must not be allowed to dim. Every birth was proof, every stillborn infant a sacrifice, every union a step towards something he called the perfect circle. By 1880, the Whittaker family tree had become something else entirely. Not a tree, but a knot. Branches folded back on themselves until no one could say where one line ended and another began. Children were born who could not speak, who rocked themselves silently for hours, whose eyes never seemed to focus on this world, but somewhere beyond it. The neighbors called them cursed, but inside the cabin, the family called them blessed. Decades passed like this, each generation feeding back into itself, each birth another turn of the screw. And then, in the fall of 1912, came the scream that would echo down through the records. The scream that marked the night when secrecy gave way to horror. The night a child was born who carried in its body the culmination of 5 generations of silence. They called it a child, though the word hardly fit. Born of a girl too young to name herself a mother. Its first breaths were a gurgling rattle that made even hardened midwives turn away. No doctor attended that birth. No preacher dared. Only families stood in that room, whispering prayers that weren't from scripture, but from some older tongue, something passed down through blood and not through books. The girl, her name, half erased in the records, appears only as Whittaker, was said to be 16. She had carried the pregnancy in silence, her belly swelling beneath loose dresses, until her father forced her into confinement. Neighbors claimed they saw her only once, hanging laundry with trembling hands, her hair falling in ropes across her face. By then, her eyes had changed. Not their color, but their focus. She no longer looked at the world around her. She looked through it, as though listening to something no one else could hear. When the child came, it was wrapped in membranes so thick they had to be cut with a hunting knife. What emerged made the family fall to their knees. Its head was too large, the skin thin as parchment, veins sprawling across it like ink on wet paper. Its mouth did not open but quivered in movements that looked like words without sound. Some said the infant's hands clutched at the air, though others swore those hands clutched at things unseen. Grasping, pulling, as though reaching for someone already present in the room. For weeks it lived, though lived is a generous word. It lay still for hours, then shuddered with spasms that shook the bed frame. It never cried, only hummed. A sound described in one surviving letter as, like the wind finding its way through a grave keyhole. The family treated it as prophecy fulfilled. They whispered, perfect circle. But something else happened in those weeks. The child aged too quickly, not in body, but in its presence. Visitors few dared, spoke of feeling judged under its shifting gaze. One old neighbor said she saw it smile at her, though its mouth had never fully formed. Another claimed that, while watching it, she suddenly smelled earth turned fresh, as though standing over an open grave. The family wrote everything down. Charts, diagrams, even sketches of the child's twisted features, all kept in a ledger bound in rawhide. That ledger, decades later, would be discovered under the rotting floorboards when the house was abandoned. Scholars who read it argued whether it was medical observation, religious mania, or something else entirely. But what none of them could deny was that the child, EM's child, was treated as both sacrifice and savior. And yet, the mountains never let such secrets rest. Soon animals began to vanish from nearby farms. Chickens, dogs, even a calf. When hunters searched the woods, they found remains scattered in strange patterns, bones arranged in spirals, skulls stacked as if by careful human hands. The Whitakers denied involvement, but at night, neighbors swore they saw lanterns moving between the trees, carrying something too heavy for one person to bear. The longer it lived, the darker the nights became around the Whitaker cabin. Neighbors whispered that the forest itself seemed to recoil, as if the trees bent away from the roof beneath which the child lay. Dogs refused to cross the property line, howling at shadows no one else could see. By the third month, strange symbols began to appear, carved into barn doors, etched into fence posts, burned into the soil itself as if by invisible fire. Circles within circles, lines twisting back on themselves, shapes that resembled both womb and tomb. No one admitted to making them, yet everyone knew where they came from. The child itself grew more silent. It did not laugh, did not babble. But when its mother, or whatever name could be given to the girl who bore it, held it close, those who witnessed swore they heard whispers. Not from the girl, not from the room, from the child. Words in a dialect no one could understand, layered, overlapping, as though several voices spoke through a single mouth. Livestock began dying without wounds. Their bodies were found bloated, eyes clouded, mouths filled with black foam. The local doctor, summoned by frightened neighbors, suggested poisoning. But what kind of poison arranges the bodies in rows? Hooves pointing east, eyes staring west. He refused to visit again. The Whitakers called these events signs. They claimed the blood had spoken, that the perfect circle was unfolding as promised. At night, they gathered in the woods, carrying jars of their own blood drawn with hunting knives, pouring it into the soil beneath moonlight. Some claimed they sang hymns, though not ones known to any church. The sound carried down the holler like a dirge, mournful and yet triumphant, a song for something not yet born, or perhaps for something already here. And then came the drawings. Found years later in the ashes of the abandoned cabin, scraps of paper showed crude figures. Animals with too many legs, people with faces melting into each other. Spirals that seemed to draw the eye inward until one felt pulled into them. The child's hand was too small to hold a pencil, and yet the family claimed these drawings appeared in its crib, left as offerings or warnings. One scrap in particular showed a house aflame, stick figures kneeling before it, and something rising above them, neither man nor beast, but something twisted from both. By then, the girl who birthed it had wasted away. Her hair fell out in clumps, her teeth loosened, and her skin yellowed with sickness no medicine could name. The family did not weep. They said she was being hollowed, made into a vessel for what was to come. When she died, the child did not cry. It only hummed louder, a sound that crawled into the ears of all who heard it and stayed there, echoing long after silence fell. It was only after the girl's death that the truth began to emerge. Truth too grotesque to be denied, though still whispered only in shadows. The child she birthed was not the offspring of some nameless wanderer, nor of a secret suitor in the valley. Its father was her father, and her brother, and her uncle. The Whitaker bloodline was no tree, but a serpent swallowing itself, devouring and birthing from the same poisoned vein. Old genealogical notes, uncovered in courthouse basements, show the pattern clearly. The family practiced what they called rotation, a ritual arrangement of unions designed to keep blood from ever mingling with outsiders. Each daughter bore children not to one man but to several, her father, her brother, her cousin. Paternity was never hidden, because it was irrelevant. All were fathers, all were brothers. The lines blurred until words like sister, mother, and wife lost all meaning. The result was children born as reflections of their ancestry, not new lives but echoes folded back on themselves. One boy in 1894 was said to have been born with the exact face of his grandfather, so exact that neighbors refused to look him in the eye, claiming they saw death staring back. Another, in 1901, spoke in complete sentences before the age of 2, but never learned to walk, his legs twisted into knots beneath him. The girl who bore the 1912 child, E.M., was herself both daughter and niece, both granddaughter and cousin. To trace her parentage was to walk in circles, each branch of the family tree bending inward until one realized there was no outside at all. She was born of a union between her father and his own sister, who was also his wife. To the family, this was not horror, but holiness. The tighter the circle, the purer the blood. When the child was revealed, some whispered it was not an accident, but the very goal toward which the Whitakers had been striving for generations. Its deformed skull, its multiple mouths, its strange and silent hum, these were not curses but confirmations. They spoke of the culmination, a being that would close the circle and prove their blood unbroken. But beyond the family's warped pride, the community began to recoil. Word of the truth seeped through the hills, spreading with each hushed confession. Mothers forbade their children from wandering near the Whitaker land. Preachers thundered about abominations, though never daring to name them aloud. The sense of dread grew heavy, and soon, dread gave way to violence. Because when a town discovers that incest and blood rites have been festering in its shadow for half a century, it does not look away, it strikes, and it burns. The winter of 1913 is remembered in Roanoke County for two things: the blizzard that buried the valley in silence, and the fire that broke that silence forever. On the night of February 11th, a group of men rode up the mountain, torches hidden beneath their coats, axes strapped to their saddles. They told their wives they were going hunting, but no one believed it. Too many cows had been found drained, too many children waking from night terrors that all spoke the same words. The humming, make it stop. When they reached the Whitaker clearing, the air was still. No dogs barked, no wind moved. The cabin windows glowed faintly, not with lamplight, but with a pale, shifting color, as though something inside was breathing against the glass. The men didn't knock. They poured kerosene at the base of the walls and lit their torches. What happened next was never written in official records, only in the fragments of testimony, whispered decades later. The fire caught fast, racing up the dry wood, turning the cabin into a pyre. And then came the screams. Not human, not animal, but something in between. High, pitched, layered, as though several voices screamed through one throat. Some of the men swore they saw figures through the flames. Children with too many arms. Women whose faces blurred into those of their brothers. Shadows that seemed to split and rejoin as they moved. One man dropped his torch and ran, babbling about eyes in the smoke, eyes that were not burned but watching. And then came the sound. Not the crack of beams collapsing, not the roar of fire. The humming, louder than it had ever been, rising above the blaze, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. It grew until their teeth rattled, until their hearts beat out of rhythm, until one man fell to his knees clutching his skull. When at last the roof caved in, the sound did not stop. It only shifted, sinking lower, deeper, until it seemed to come from the earth itself. Some swore they heard it long after the flames had died, long after the snow had covered the ruins. A low vibration, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the soil, By dawn, the cabin was ash. No bodies were recovered, not a single bone. The men said nothing when they returned to town. Their wives asked no questions. The official story recorded in the county ledger was simple: Whitaker residence destroyed in fire. 'Cause unknown. No survivors. But the humming did not end, and in time it would return. For a while, the mountains seemed relieved. The clearing where the Whitaker cabin once stood grew wild with briars and black oak, as if the earth itself hurried to cover its wound. Children dared each other to run across the ruins, but none lingered. Even in daylight, they said the air was too heavy there, too close. Yet the silence was only a mask. By the spring of 1914, strange happenings began again. Livestock were found mutilated in the same precise ways as before. Organs missing, bodies drained. Travelers passing through, Rowan Oak spoke of voices in the timberline at night, whispering in a tongue they could not place. Hunters reported circles of stones deep in the forest, still warm to the touch though no fire had been lit. Most disturbing of all were the sightings. Figures on the ridges at dusk, pale and thin, moving with a gait not quite human. Sometimes they appeared alone, sometimes in groups, standing side by side in silence, always watching. They would vanish if approached, leaving only footprints too small for men, too wide for women, too twisted for children. The elders in town said the fire had not ended the bloodline. They believed the Whitakers had not all been inside when the cabin burned, that some had slipped into the trees, carrying their secret with them. If that were true, then the child, the one born in 1912, may not have perished in the flames. It may have been taken deeper into the mountains, hidden, nurtured, allowed to grow. Rumors hardened into fear when a preacher from a neighboring valley came to hold revival meetings. On the third night, his voice broke mid-sermon. He said he felt something in the ground beneath the tent, a vibration, a low hum. He left before morning, refusing to return. And then came the journal, found by a trapper in 1917, half buried in mud near a creek that ran red after storms. Its pages, waterlogged and rotting, belonged to a woman known only by her initials, M.W., one of Joshua Whitaker's great-granddaughters. The handwriting wavered between frantic and childlike, as if written in many hands. One passage read, "The circle is not broken. The fire was but a birth. He lives, though he does not walk as we do. He hums to us in the soil, in the marrow, in the womb. Soon the circle will close, and the valley will hear it." The journal was burned by the trapper's wife, but too late. He had already told others what he had read. From then on, no one entered the northern slope after sundown. Not for wood, not for game, not for anything. The Whitakers were gone, yes. But the mountains, they remembered, and in their depths, something else remained. The legend might have ended there, smothered under ash, sealed in whispers, had the world not changed. But the 20th century brought men who did not fear curses, men who carried notebooks instead of rifles, cameras instead of crosses. In 1972, a team of genealogists from the State University came to Rowan Oak, tracing forgotten bloodlines for a study on Appalachian isolation. What they found sent half of them back down the mountain within a week. The Whitaker name, erased from census rolls after the fire, lived on in fragmented branches. Children born with twisted limbs, adults unable to speak in words, but only in guttural tones, families who would not, or could not, explain their ancestry. The researchers were forbidden from publishing their findings, but one student kept copies. In her notes, she described visits to remote shacks where pale figures rocked silently on porches, their eyes wide and unfocused, their mouths opening and closing as though humming some tune Only they could hear. She wrote of a boy, no older than 6, whose skull bulged at the temples in a way that mirrored the crude drawings found in the Whitaker ruins decades before. Then came the photographs. Grainy, blurred, but undeniable. Children with features too symmetrical to be natural. Faces that seemed mirrored, almost duplicated. One image, supposedly taken in 1973, showed a woman in a floral dress standing in a field. Behind her, half hidden in the trees, was a figure. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted unnaturally, its mouth a dark oval. The woman swore no one else had been there when the picture was taken. By the 1990s, the Whitakers had become both rumor and spectacle. Tabloid journalists crept into the hills, chasing whispers of the Inbred clan that time forgot. Some returned with shaky footage of cabins littered with broken furniture, of children covering their faces, of guttural moans rising from the dark. Others did not return at all. Their cars were found abandoned on mountain roads, engines still running, doors open to the night. One thing, however, remained constant across every account: the sound. Investigators, journalists, even thrill seekers all reported it. The low hum, rising from the ground, from the woods, from the bodies of those who should not have been born. Some described it as the vibration of bees inside the skull. Others said it was like hearing your own blood sing. Modern science tried to explain it. Genetic collapse, neurological decay, mass hysteria. But no theory could account for the drawings, for the mirrored faces, for the symbols that continued to appear in the dirt around long, abandoned Whitaker homesteads. Circles within circles, spirals that seemed to pull inward forever. And so the question remains: were the Whitakers merely the product of human sin and secrecy, or had they, in their endless turning inward, touched something beyond the human? Because even now, in certain hollows of Roanoke, locals swear that on still nights, when the fog rolls heavy across the ridges, the earth itself hums. By the turn of the millennium, the Whitakers were no longer a secret. They were an obsession. Internet forums traded grainy images, blurry home videos, and whispered accounts. Some claimed to have wandered into Roanoke at night and heard the hum. Others insisted they had seen it, that warped congregation of pale bodies, swaying in rhythm, as though to a song older than language. In 2001, a videotape surfaced. Its origin was never confirmed, but those who viewed it swore it was real. The footage showed the inside of a shack lit by a single lantern. Against the far wall sat 3 figures. Their faces were slack, their eyes unfocused, their mouths opening and closing in slow unison. From the speakers came a low drone, rising and falling in pulses like breath. At one point, the camera shook violently, and the lens turned toward the dirt floor. There, scratched into the soil, was the same symbol seen in the ruins of 1912, a circle folding into itself. The tape ended abruptly, mid-hum. Geneticists, emboldened by the frenzy, requested access to surviving family members. Some samples were taken under the guise of routine medical care. What they found defied the language of science. Chromosomes fused where they should not have been, sequences looping in recursive patterns. A genome eating itself, mirroring itself, folding into itself, as though the bloodline was no longer entirely human, but something else. The official report was buried, but a leaked excerpt circulated briefly before vanishing from every archive. Consistent low-frequency vibration in cranial cavities. Not auditory. Tissue itself resonating. Unknown cause. By 2012, exactly 1 century after the child's birth, a new wave of stories rose. Hikers reported lights in the timberline, lantern-like, but moving too smoothly, weaving in perfect circles. Campers woke to find strange carvings around their tents. Spirals pressed into the soil, as though something had knelt in the dark to leave its mark. And always, the hum. Some believe the child of 1912 never died. That it had been carried deeper into the mountains, grown without eyes for the sun. Matured into something both less and more than human. They call it the circle. A being that exists not as an individual, but as an echo, a vibration, a resonance that threads itself through its descendants. A rumor persists of footage locked away in state archives, seized from amateur filmmakers who vanished in Rowan Oak. A clip said to show a figure crawling from the tree line, its body pale and glistening, its mouth opening not in a scream, but in a tone, a single, unwavering note that caused the camera to distort, the frame itself to bend inward like the spiral on the Whittaker walls. Whether it is myth, mass hysteria, or something else entirely, one truth remains. The bloodline has not ended. It moves unseen. In shacks at the edge of forgotten roads, in faces that blur and mirror themselves, in vibrations that seep through the soil on still nights. And if you listen closely, even now, you may hear it, the hum that began in 1912, still circling, still folding, still calling. The climax came quietly, not with headlines, but with a file. In 2019, an anonymous upload appeared on an encrypted forum. The file name was nothing, but a date 02/11/13, the anniversary of the fire that should have ended the Whittakers. Inside were 4 video clips, each no longer than 30 seconds. Their metadata traced back to a government lab in West Virginia. The first clip showed a hospital room. A figure sat on the bed, its back to the camera. The skin was pale, the shoulders narrow, the head too large. The sound was worse than the image. A constant droning hum, like a cello bow drawn endlessly across one string. Doctors in masks moved around the figure, none daring to touch it. The second clip was darker. Grainy surveillance footage of a rural road at night. A car idled at the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. Something moved in the tree line. Tall, thin, pale, its head tilted unnaturally, and when the driver's door opened, the hum bled through the speakers until the microphone peaked into static. The third clip was not visual at all, but a spectrogram, lines of frequency analysis from an audio recording. At the bottom, the human range of sound. Above it, the harmonic layers, and then, higher still, a spiral of frequencies that bent inward and looped on themselves. Impossible to chart. A closed circle, a voice not human, not mechanical, but something that sang in recursion. The final clip lasted only 7 seconds. A figure stood in the center of a concrete chamber. Its mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Instead, the camera shook, bent, collapsed inward until the frame folded into static. At the bottom of the screen, just before it ended, appeared a line of text. Subject 12. Circle intact. The file vanished within days. Those who claim to have saved it found their hard drives corrupted, their backups erased. Only fragments remain, traded like relics among those who still seek the truth. And yet, reports continue. A hunter in Rowan Oak who woke to find his camp surrounded by spirals pressed into the soil. A hiker who blacked out on the ridge and woke with blood trickling from both ears, swearing he had heard a choir underground. A woman in West Virginia who gave birth to a child whose skull vibrated faintly, as if resonating with a song no one else could hear. The Whittakers were not erased by fire. Their blood folded inward, deeper and deeper, until something else emerged. Something that hums still, beneath the soil, beneath the bone, beneath the thin skin of the world itself. And if the circle is truly intact, then it was never a family at all. It was a seed. Because the Whittakers are not a story with an ending. They are a contagion, a recursion, a pattern repeating itself through time. Fire could not kill them. Silence could not bury them. Science could not explain them. The further researchers dig into the archives, the more the pattern reveals itself. Birth records sealed under court order. Autopsies misfiled, their pages stained with water and ash. Reports of children taken from remote homes, placed into state care, only to vanish from the system before adulthood. Some say they were adopted. Others say they were absorbed into something else. Programs without names, files without numbers, labs without doors. And always, always the hum. Locals still swear the mountains themselves breathe with it. Visitors describe it not as sound, but as sensation. The way teeth chatter before a storm, or the way the chest tightens when standing near high voltage. A resonance, a frequency, a reminder. Those who listen too long begin to dream of circles. Circles that turn inward until they collapse, then bloom outward into patterns too vast for the mind to hold. They wake with blood at their nostrils, with symbols scratched into their bed frames, with the taste of iron on their tongues. Some claim the Whitakers are no longer confined to Rowan Oak, that their blood, their pattern, their hum, has spread outward like a ripple, into nearby towns, into distant cities, into anyone who dares to trace their name through the archives. And so the story remains unfinished, because it cannot finish. The circle does not break, it only closes. And if you feel the faint vibration now, behind your eyes, at the base of your skull, do not mistake it for silence. The Whitakers are still humming. If you are still here, still listening, you are already inside it. Because stories like this are not told. They are carried like blood, passed down like a sickness. Once the name is spoken, once the pattern is traced, it begins to live inside the listener. The Whitakers understood this. That is why they kept their journals hidden, their rituals whispered, their homes sealed shut from the outside world. They knew contamination was not physical. It was memory. Think of Sarah May. 17 years old, her body hollowed out by the child she carried, her family singing over her as she dissolved. Think of the faces on that infant. Faces that should never have been, twisting into a spiral no doctor could name. Think of the agents in black coats, taking the body away, but not stopping the hum. They couldn't. They never could. And now think of yourself. Alone in your room, your city quiet outside, the hour whatever it happens to be for you. Do you hear it? That low vibration, the one that wasn't there before this story began, it will follow you now. In the silence before sleep, in the pause between breaths. There are families in America whose names you will never know. Families who have been taught to keep their blood pure, their lines unbroken. Families who do not marry out, who do not leave the holler, who do not welcome strangers. They hum in the dark, and they wait. And when you close your eyes tonight, ask yourself this. What would you do if you found out your mother was also your sister? What would you do if the hum you hear right now isn't coming from outside at all, but from inside your own blood? The circle does not break. It only closes.